Let me talk a bit about myself just so that you know that it's not some random guy speaking on random topic that he doesn't know about. So at Salesforce, I work on cryptography ecosystem. How many of you know what Salesforce does? All right. So Salesforce is this gigantic ecosystem. If you have heard about Slack, Tableau, all of those products are part of Salesforce. And what my team does to ensure, or what my team does is make sure that data across Salesforce is secure. So dealing with cryptographic, encryption, decryption, signatures, internal certificates, issuance as well as revocation, all of those at some point or the other go through my team. So dealing with cybersecurity is one of the things that we have a side focus on, and we also make sure that it's at the center of everything we do. Apart from that, if you sort of recognize me, you might have seen me in few of the stand-up circuits, booed at me at some point, which is why that career is not going so well. So I'm putting my whole focus on software for now. Few ground rules. I will go through these topics pretty fast. I will not assume that in 30 minutes I can teach you about any of these topics that I'll be talking about. My hope is by this session you'll be able to recognize trends and I'll be able to scare you enough that when you go back and look at your application, you'll start applying few of these principles in your application. So I'll put in more focus on incidents that have happened over the years and how simple practice changes could have stopped them from happening in the first place. That will be the focus in here. So the rundown is, we'll be talking about zero trust, threat intelligence, and secure software development lifecycle. And across each of them, we will start looking at incidents that happened with major companies that you might recognize and how these practices could have helped in there. Is there anyone in here who is aware about these topics already? No? Oh, one person? Oh, nice. So this is a 2-person. So this is a pretty beginner level room, and I'll try and keep it at that level. So zero trust, another buzzword. It means nothing more than the fact that you should not trust anyone. The fact that you all are in this room doesn't mean that every one of you have brought the passes to this room. That's the assumption. So never trust that just because someone is in the boundary, they should be in the boundary. Always validate them again. If zero trust was being applied over here, that would be someone standing at that door and checking your credentials again, whether you can enter for this session or not. It's fairly new. So in 2010 is when this word came around for the first time in this very blog post by this very gentleman, whose line became very famous, called "Never trust, always verify." The idea is very simple, and I'll try and go over this with a little scenario. You have few applications in your organization, and all of them are spread across. For this scenario, we are assuming that there are a couple of servers, there are a couple of databases for that server, and they're all talking to each other and living their life happily. But you realize that they need to be logged in. So what do? You set up a firewall around them and set a credential for that firewall. And what does that mean? There's this one password in here that gives you access to everything in here. Now you might recognize this resolves like a microservice architecture, and in microservice, every application does its own authentication authorization. Just a couple of years ago, that was not the case. Now the things have evolved enough that you now have on-prem and off-prem or cloud providers, and your AWS is also accessible directly. You might recognize this. Once you're in your corporate VPN, you can access everything that's there. It can also be things like your intranet. It can also be things like your internal ideation portal. And some of you may recognize how certain company had their ideation portal exposed to the world, and that's how their ideas were leaking out. Let's flip everything together. And you might start recognizing things over here that when you are entering your office, you start with your ID card. That's what we did in this conference. And once you're in your office premise, there's an inherent assumption that you're part of that organization, right? And that means that you get access to everything that organization or that office has to offer. So you get access to things like printers, conference room, cafeterias, so on and so forth, right? So you have seen zero trust in principle already. You might also recognize that certain companies, what they will do is that to get to cafeteria or to get food or get food above a certain token limit, you have to show your ID card again, or you have to scan your badge again on that counter, and only then can you go ahead and get that food, right? So this is companies and your office administrator applying zero trust every day, and you have been around them, yet we don't take them back to our softwares. If we replace all of that with our softwares again, you have your perimeter, you have your credentials all along. So whenever a service, even if your internal service is trying to access another service within your corporate VPN that is already logged, has MFA and whatnot, you still validate it. You still ask them for the credentials. And that is what, as I said, zero trust is. These are various principles about it. You can read about them. It's not rocket science at all. But the base idea is simple. If you educate everyone in your ecosystem enough about when to authenticate and how frequently to authenticate and reauthorize, that will solve everything that you see in here. So if your developers know that credentials and passwords will leak, that means that they will have short-term authentication tokens. If your developers or your people who are building the software know that unless there are events and monitoring and logs in place that can tell you that, hey, this account has been accessed with the wrong credentials 20 times in the last 5 seconds. That is not humanly possible. People would take 10 seconds to at least type in a password. So if you have that rate of unauthorized access trying to get into that account, that means that someone is trying to do a DDoS attack on that particular account, right? So education is everything. If there's one thing from this slide that I would want you to take back, that's educate. Educate everyone in your pipeline, not just developers, not just product owners, but across the board. And as we'll see later on, educating the leadership is even more important, because eventually your time will be decided by them. Moving on, let's look at a breach. How many of you know about LastPass or have used LastPass? Okay, quite a few. So LastPass is this service wherein instead of you managing your password, you give it to LastPass and it will manage your password for you. Very interesting proposition, right? It's like banks. Banks tell you, hey, we have this secure building and everything in place. Come and put your, or give us your money and we will keep it for you. For that, we will charge you certain amount. And whenever you want this money, we'll give it back to you. But what if you go to the bank one day and they say, someone came in and looted everything. Now we don't have anything from you. They were charging you for nothing, right? LastPass went through an incident. I would say to this same severity. You can read more about this incident, but essentially what happened is there was a first level of breach that happened. Someone got into the LastPass corporate VPN and essentially had access for almost 4 days. And in that particular case, they were able to bypass MFA and get access to few credentials. In those 4 days, they were also able to get a better understanding of what the network topology of LastPass looks like. So how do developers access, which VPN software is used, which software do developers use, so on and so forth. This is what LastPass recognized, published details about this, and said that we have this under our control. Few months later, I think in towards the end of 2022 is when this happened, and towards the mid of 23, again another breach happened wherein a DevOps engineer's laptop was actually compromised through a vulnerability in one of the media software that they were using. It's not disclosed which software this was. And with that, they were able to install a keylogger on that DevOps engineer software. And when that DevOps engineer was going and typing in the password for the master vault, which is where all the customer vaults are encrypted with, they were able to get access to that master vault. And boom. Once you have access to the master vault, that means you have access to every customer data that's out there. You still have to get access to that customer data to be able to decrypt them, but now you can decrypt them all together. So again, very, very simple attack. Someone got into the network and were able to slide across the network into system that they should not have had access to. Had zero trust been implemented over here, it's in the gray area, right? But had zero trust principles been implemented over here, what that would have meant is that once someone got into the laptop, it would have been difficult for them to get into corporate vault. And similarly for the first incident as well. How many of you know about Operation Aurora? All right. How many of you have seen or recognized this thumbnail? This is from a very popular series on YouTube called Hacking Google. I would encourage you to go look at it. It's very well, the production quality of that is very good. What Google is trying to show with that is how easy it is to get hacked and what Google is doing to prevent all of that. But Operation Aurora essentially was claimed to be state-owned actors, especially, okay, I have not mentioned this here, so I'll not take the name of that country, but essentially few countries came together and their goal was to get the IP, code base, IP, intellectual property of few major US based companies. And you can imagine which country is being talked about over here. Google was affected by this, Adobe, Akamai, Juniper, all of these companies later came out and said that we were also affected by this. And the way this was done was very simple. It started with a phishing attack, and once the perpetrator was in the network, they started sliding laterally and gaining access to other companies and other laptops and servers within that. With this, what Google actually did is that they published this white paper and framework called Beyond Corp, and it's openly published, and that is now one of the industry standards for zero trust networks. So I would highly encourage you folks to look at this, and also this series on YouTube. All right, so 4 words: never trust, always verify, and re-verify, and re-verify. So always assume that someone that you're meeting or someone that the request that is coming from a source that should not be sending in that request. Yeah. Moving on to threat intelligence, the idea of this is very simple. Again, there are a lot of ways to talk about it, but the idea simply is that you alone cannot be on top of everything. You can put in all your effort, reach to a certain point, and maybe some other company of your size or someone of bigger size or smaller size is also putting in that effort and reaching at some point. Now, how can you collaborate and as one front be a couple of steps ahead of bad actors? And that's what threat intelligence is. All of these companies will have their own findings, and on a common platform share their findings with others. 3PP or third-party vulnerabilities is one of them. US government has various databases wherein they very regularly will issue out notices about, say, third-party libraries or a common library that you might be using which has a certain vulnerability in it. And there's a flip side to this coin. If you have access to this data, to these vulnerabilities, that means the bad actors also have access to this vulnerability. So it's very important that you at least be on top of these open databases and keep on updating your software and your dependencies in a timely manner. The idea of this threat intelligence is also very simple. I really like the analogy that you see on the right. The idea is very simple, that we all know that we have to put in a lot of effort on preventive measure, but that doesn't mean that we don't put in effort in reactive measures as well. This idea, I borrowed it again from that same YouTube series that I talked about. But simple thing is, whenever a building is being built, or say you go to an hotel and that hotel was being designed, there was a lot of conscious effort put into making it fire safe, right? They want to make the design fire safe. They want to make, in case a fire happens, they want to make exit out of that building very easy. They want to use materials that are fireproof. They also want to ensure that when let's say a fire breaks out, it's contained and it doesn't spread, and everything is designed with that in mind. But that doesn't mean that there isn't this whole industry of firefighting service out there, right? While you have put in all this effort to make sure that fire doesn't break out, and if it breaks out, it's contained, that doesn't mean that if it is not contained, or if it by chance it breaks out, you don't have firefighters who will come rushing through to put out that fire. Assuming it's not in Bangalore, there's no water, there's traffic, will not be able to reach in time. So there are a few high level types of threat intelligence, and various levels in your organization will be concerned with different things. Tactical essentially is, and this is where I personally like to operate at, it's more about, is this really an threat to me or not? So you look at various threats that are upcoming, and then you identify which of these are relevant to my business organization or what I'm building in the first place. Then there's strategic. So essentially, if you're looking at a couple of years down the line, which of these will come into affect you and bite you back a couple of years down the line. So maybe they're not a threat to you today, but a couple of years down the line, but you start preparing for them today itself. Operation is more day-to-day, and same technical is again getting down to the base level. Stuxnet was a very interesting breach that happened. Essentially, US government and intelligence from various governments, they wanted to make sure that this particular country, Iran in this particular case, doesn't move or doesn't gain advancements in its nuclear research program. And all of these countries essentially came together. They used 4 zero-day vulnerabilities. How many of you know what zero-day vulnerabilities are? Okay, a few people. So just a refresher, zero-day vulnerabilities are very low-level vulnerability that no one knows about. So if I can exploit a zero-day vulnerability, that means that it's there everywhere. So let's say I exploit a zero-day vulnerability in Microsoft. That means if I know a zero-day vulnerability in Microsoft, I can exploit every machine that is operating or using Microsoft. And there's a whole black market about around zero-day vulnerabilities. It's sold for millions and millions of dollars, and it's very hard to come across one zero-day vulnerability, let alone these intelligence companies using 4 of them together on one specific use case. It's very rare. The end result of all of this was, and this goes to show how big of an impact a simple software can have. The nuclear reactors wherein they were refining the radioactive element, these folks were able to go get into them and destroy them. And that essentially set back the nuclear program of Iran by a couple of years. And this was openly acknowledged by the countries that were involved. The very important thing is Iran's air-gapped or nuclear program was air-gapped. What that means is that there was no outside connection, yet they were able to figure it out. It's very interesting, a very good read with this. Okay, the idea is do as much as you can to prevent an attack from happening, but don't assume the attack will not be happening. It might just so happen that when you're building your walls high up, the bad actor is already within the compound. Finally, secure software development lifecycle is again an idea. It doesn't mean anything by itself, and that's the very important thing. You can't wake up tomorrow, go to your team in the stand-up and say, from today, secure software development is what we will be following. There's no such thing as secure software development lifecycle. The idea or what it essentially is, a set of practices that you can start implementing along with things that you're already doing. So there are various cycles of software development, and you start injecting security centric themes in each of them. This is a very nice image from one of the blog posts that is referenced in the latest slide. So again, when you're planning, when you're designing, when you're implementing, testing, maintenance, and when you go back through all of them, you start thinking about security and how to make sure your software is secure. There are a few standards again. NIST is a very interesting standard. It's released by again a lot of governments also involved. So essentially what governments wants to do is that they want to make sure that companies that are operating within their boundaries are as secure as possible. And this is why they put in a lot of investment in making sure these life cycles that they're publishing are open, are up to date, and are not lagging behind. So unlike most of government activities, these frameworks will not lag behind in most of the cases. So NIST essentially is a framework that you can start adapting, which tells you that if you're in this stage, be on the lookout for these 5 things. If you're in this stage, have you checked on these 5 things or these 10 things in your life cycle or not? Looking at another breach, how many of you know or remember about Equifax breach? No? So data breach of 143 million customers. And when we say 143 million customers, these were secure and sensitive data of this customer. So it's not just email ID and password, but the social identifiers that were breached in this particular breach. This essentially ended up being Equifax agreeing to pay almost $700 million because of this breach that happened. And what had happened is they were using a certain version of Apache, and that version of Apache had a certain vulnerability that was detected in it. And Apache had fixed that vulnerability long time, for a really long time, and they had released that fix. These were part of the databases that we just talked about. And the idea is that whenever these releases are made, the security releases are made, you go ahead and fix them immediately, because the bad actors also have access to them, and immediately they will start looking for fingerprints on how to exploit them. But Equifax thought, nah, we are fine. We'll come to that when we have to. We are small enough, maybe no one will be able to discover this. It turns out people were able to discover it, exploit it, get the data that they needed. Reputation loss is one thing. There were dollar loss to this whole thing as well. If I'm not wrong, it was in and around for almost 4 to 7 months is when they were lagging behind when it came to this. Again, this is a quote that I really like: building software without security is skydiving. So it's very nice and fun and a fairyland as long as things are going right, but really scary as soon as things go wrong. And as it turns out, things will go wrong eventually. Okay, all of this is fine. This is nice for you to hear and be interested with it. But what is really important is that not only you agree, but people working with you agree. This leadership agrees with that. I'll not go over all of these points, but at the end of the day, it's a balance. It's a balance of, I have $100 in my kitty. Do I spend that on hiring another developer for $100? Or do I spend on hiring another security professional for that $100? Or do I spend on hiring 2 people for $70 and $30 on both of these domains, right? So you have to balance all of them. And depending on which stage of your progress you're in, that shift can be very different. And it's a gray area. Within the same company, within the same team, for the same product, for different features also, these markers will change. The one that I really like to discuss is what is today versus tomorrow, and how difficult is it to change it tomorrow. The idea essentially is that today, when you're building software, you assume that you will have to make this change at a later point, and with that you keep touch point opens within your code base, such that tomorrow someone can come in and start adding those methods or interfaces or adding those practices within it. With that, that's about it. Thank you.